Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. As we get together today in celebration of our International Women's Day 2025, it's here. It is important for us to recognize how far in 2025 we would talk about this journey coming along, saying we've made such a progress in gender equity and leadership inclusion. But while we say that, there's also a lot of room to grow and make a different impact because the future is not the same it was. We're up to a new era of challenges, but I think we're always up for challenges. And with this great panel in this room, I think I'm excited to address the topic that we're working on today is building bridges, policies and practices that propel allyship and leadership inclusion, with allyship being at the lead level. Personal experiences and organizational experiences put together, I think it calls for a very engaging session. So welcome everyone. And we're honored to have this incredible panel of leaders who bring this expertise to share their insights today with us. So, welcome, Praveen, Adam, and Lovely. Very
Thank you.
excited to have you. A
Mhm.
little bit of introduction on our panel. Praveen, as CIO of a multi-billion dollar organization, brings insights into leadership and organizational impact. DeLovely, an executive in technology, has mentored and been in the industry of impact for diversity, inclusion, and personal experiences, mentoring along the way. Very excited to hear from you today. And Adam, our ever champion for diversity and also helping organizations along the journey. So, your experiences that you will share today, I think, are going to be extremely important to us.
Mhm.
So, with that, we would dive straight in to our first topic, which I believe is important from a current landscape of women in leadership, is what I would like to ask Praveen. As a multi billion dollar organization, what are the trends that you see that organizations may be bringing in to kind of propel, uh, including women leadership, into a formal organizational impact?
Yeah. Thank you, Madhvi. Appreciate you having me on this panel. I'm honored to be here. Lovely to meet you guys, Adam and Lovely.
Yes.
I've been in technology for the last 30 years and I've seen a lot of changes happening.
Mhm.
Uh, Not to use the cliche old boys club, but at the leadership level, there's still some of that is happening. But I definitely have seen a lot of positive changes happening in the at the leadership level, especially in the functional areas. There's a lot more representation from women in HR, legal, and technology side and finance, but I still see some gaps from a sales perspective and operations side. And that's where I think a little more inclusion and a little more pipeline growth from the bottom up level will help. So I think some of the gaps and challenges some of the companies are seeing is around not having that pipeline process so that they can take the young talent and give them opportunities to see what is the art of the possible, what are the different leadership roles that are available for them in the future, and make them think slightly outside the box, right? Otherwise, people come with preconceived notion, this is the path I'm going to go in, and that's where they get stuck.
That's true. Thank you. Thank you. I think from an organizational perspective, you did shed light on it, and that's really good for us to know. Lovely, lovely. You worked in Fortune clients before and must have navigated multiple scenarios at different levels of careers, maybe as a young tech enthusiast going on to some leadership roles. Can you share some of those scenarios where you must have found some bottleneck, a hindering experience to growth at different journeys of your stage of career?
Yes, and thanks for having me. I think, I definitely have some anecdotes where it was, kind of jarring and disappointing to hear discouraging remarks from colleagues, but also how that's actually how I've turned that on its head in my career. There are dozens of examples where, I've been on calls with executive leaders. And when I was asking questions, people like, who's that girl speaking? I'm not even a woman anymore in the workplace. to, telling my leadership that I was going to, that I was looking at an opportunity, a bigger opportunity at the company, and being told, you wouldn't succeed there. You're doing just fine with what you're doing. We're talking to a leader about an opportunity years after I had worked with them, and he was like, well, you just do great as a manager. I think that's, you just do really well there, and kind of being pigeonholed into places, because oftentimes as a woman and as someone who's in, a minority, you go into a role and you're giving 150%. That's what you've been taught from day one, that you have to work harder, you have to stay longer, you have to be more educated. So you are bringing your best work. And too often leaders will see that as, hey, I want to keep my ace in the hole where they are. But not really be thinking about the advancement and how that person can grow. So what I've done when I've been able to get into those leadership roles and be part of those conversations around succession planning and calibration, I have a voice because I have been marginalized. I have been dismissed. I have been set aside. I have been mischaracterized. And I have been looked over a lot of times. So, I've been in calibrations where I hear the majority of the people, who often are men, saying a woman can't go into that role, or she needs more development. And I will bring the one to bring up these juxtapositions, like, well, if we're going to say this about this individual, let's compare this to this other individual and understand why we're looking at them differently. And I've been able to do that for women. I've done that for men. I've done that for white men, because I know how that feels. And I know in a lot of years of my career, sometimes there wasn't someone to advocate for me. I had all the pieces, but I didn't look the part. I didn't talk the part. I didn't make someone feel like I was part of the club. I didn't have the secret handshake. So now that I'm in those spaces, I advocate for anyone that I feel is being marginalized or pushed aside, or we're not looking at the way they communicate with people. You have people in our workforce who, they may be on the spectrum, they are an introvert, they have a strong accent, and you have people who will discount them, who will say, what, I don't think this is the opportunity for them. I don't think, and instead of looking at what they've been able to achieve and the outcomes that they drive, and look at how they need to make adjustments in their leadership style, management style, team dynamic to create space for those people who are different. So many examples, and I mean, you could take it and see it as something that's a negative, but what I've done is I've just tried to remanufacture it as something that gives me a leg up, and a special power to be able to advocate for everyone and focus on the outcomes that they drive, and what they bring to the team versus just some individual character traits.
Powerful experiences, I'm sure. But making a change and making it a positive situation, I think, was so important. So thank you, DeLovely. Adam, where do you think the key systemic changes are preventing women from advancing? I mean, organizations are organizations and systems are systems. It's not an overnight change. So how do you think those changes can be impacted?
Yeah. So, when I had my podcast on supplier diversity and DE&I, one of the things we talked about a lot of times, especially in leadership, is intentionality. Right. And that's really where I go back to this. And when I talk to other leaders or I'm mentoring other people, we have to understand the why behind why we're doing things. If we just jump in and say, hey, we're going to make sure that we promote women, we're going to make sure we put women in quote unquote less traditional roles. And I actually absolutely hate that type of conversation, but it's a necessary nomenclature to use, I guess, so people can understand what's going on. But you have to understand why you're doing it. If you just throw somebody in a position and not understand why you're putting them there or what you want the outcome for that to be, the person that you've done that to is going to feel even more marginalized than they did before you did this great thing and trying to help them build their career. So you have to understand as a company, what is your goal for these programs? What are you trying to accomplish? And what is the end result you're looking for? Because if you don't have that clearly defined and you just kind of start doing stuff because you think that's what should be done or it feels like the right thing to do at the time. I mean, we can think about 5, 6, 7 years ago when everybody was jumping on the DE&I train. And now we find ourselves in the current climate, and all those companies that jumped on have now thoroughly jumped back off. And I'll tell you, it is because even back then we sat there and went, they didn't show, there was no intentionality behind it. They didn't have a why. They didn't understand the driver. They didn't understand the outcome. They didn't understand what they were trying to do with it. And then once they kind of got the shackles cut free, they jumped, right? And we who have been in the industry can see it, and kind of were like, well, weren't too surprised about those, announcements. So that's the thing, I think, very simply, and I mean, we could have an entire conversation just on the systematic changes we need to make. But I think the big key takeaway is, as a leader, whether you are the CIO, CEO, or just even a mid-level manager, understand the why behind why you're doing something in this area. Make sure that it has intention, an impact, and an outcome.
Fantastic. Intention, impact, and outcome. I think it's important. And the why, like you said, oh my God, there couldn't be another important ingredient more than starting with the why.
You have to. Absolutely.
Adam, would it be right in saying once you have the why, the communication needs to happen according to that as well? Because
Correct.
people read it as they would like to read it. And people who are in that forum to make that, I think communication needs to happen. And I'll just say it from my own experience with all the different changes that I have taken and chances that I may have taken in different roles, like you said, and not pigeonhole them in, hey, you've done this for life, you keep doing this for life. I think it was really more my executive who actually took the time to explain to me that why that change was being made. And they probably saw something that I did not. But if I was not explained to, I would take it as, are you just trying to do this to me because?
Exactly. So like when I'm mentoring a small business, right, the very first question I ask them, and it kind of takes them by surprise, I'm like, what's the end game? Right? What is the end game that we're getting to? And they're like, I'm just starting. What are you talking about, the end game? I'm like, well, if we don't know how we end, we don't know how we begin. And if I don't know how I begin, I don't know how I get to the end. Right? And so it's the same thing when we do this, whether we're managing a group of people or we're managing just ourselves. Right. And I know that personally in my career, had I understood the why behind why I was trying to do some things, I don't know if I'd make some of the choices I made earlier in my career. But I think that's very important. And you're right. The why defines our communication. The why also defines how do we start executing against that plan. Right. Because if we don't have the why, I really don't know what I'm doing. And then it just kind of becomes this thing that happens. And you don't have any drivers behind it. And then the other problem is if somebody comes up to you and starts kind of questioning your program, your decisions, your direction you're trying to take, you don't really have a way to defend it, if you will, or even explain it so it makes sense not just to them but to you as well. So yeah, the why is a crucial piece that we don't spend enough time on.
Got it. Correct. The next thing that interests me is leading into mentorship, right? Some kind of mentorship, sponsorship, and allyship. Like I said, doing the communication, because many a times your leader could be a different gender, and as a person, you might take the decisions differently. So how important, DeLovely, do you think is sponsorship required, like a mentorship sponsorship in your career? As I think they're game changers, right? They can propel a individual's journey to a complete different level. So can you share maybe like a personal experience you have around that?
Absolutely. I think it's so important for mentorship to begin as soon as possible when you get into your career. It helps you develop. It gives you opportunities to understand and decipher feedback. I tell people feedback is a gift, but I had to grow into that.
Oh, yeah.
Years of realizing the value of the feedback. And I think as a woman, there have been times where I think I had to learn that having diversity in mentorship was really important. I know I would tend to go to other women for mentorship. And there's that kindred spirit, and there's a safeness that you feel. At the same time, in the industry, especially in technology, a lot of the leaders are men. and getting used to the different ways of communication. And it's not about right or wrong. People communicate differently. Some men communicate differently than other men. Women communicate differently than men. Some women communicate differently than other women. So having that roundness in the mentorship and how you receive feedback will aid you when you're in the worst conversation with your CEO about how you've lost $70 million. That's how you
Yeah.
prepare for those conversations, because they are going to happen
Mhm.
as you grow in your career,
Mhm.
communicating through the failures, communicating through the risks and issues and challenges. But if you've had that mentorship, you've been able to have people tell you, hey, this is what happens when you feel like you have to defend yourself. These are the words that you're using. This is how you come across. But also having people who will give you opportunities and insight into things that you should try, that you should do, that you should consider, things that you might necessarily not want to consider. There have been people in my career who've said, you know what, I don't think that's the path for you, based on 1, 2, 3, based on the outcomes that you're trying to drive. And being able to take that in and say, okay, you know what, I think that's good feedback. And then when it comes to sponsorship, it takes time for someone to feel comfortable to sponsor you. So making sure that you've built that army and that village of mentors, and actually been able to be a mentee and to have your own mentees, so that someone in your circle can go to their executive leadership and say, you know what,
Yeah.
I have firsthand experience and so many other colleagues who have firsthand experience on what the lovely can do or what so and so can do. This is someone you should be saying her name in the circles that you're in. And I think about how I've been able to sponsor other people based on hearing from other people in my network. So, it's not just about having one mentor, it's about kind of moving that around. And then there's going to be some formal mentorship programs, as well as, hey, this is someone I check in with every month or every quarter. I talk about what I've been doing. I talk about some hard issues that I've been going through. But it's so important that women and men take advantage of the professional mentorship programs that are offered by maybe the company they work with, as well as go outside of the company and look at, who's someone who's maybe just a little bit higher than you in their career, maybe someone who's more junior who can help you learn a tool, a system, a process that you weren't necessarily a part of, and that you may not necessarily have to do day to day in a new leadership role, but something that you need to understand. So I think it goes both ways, and it takes time. I talk to a lot of people saying, how do I get a sponsor? I'm like, nah, that takes time. You have to kind of build it up, but it definitely starts with mentorship. And coaching as well. And I tell people, it's kind of like a triumvirate, the mentoring, the coaching, and the sponsorship. It's a holistic way to look at how you're going to grow your career.
That's true. And taking the time to get that sponsorship. I think oftentimes we lose the track, right? We feel, oh, it's so much effort, and somebody's not doing this for me, and you tend to go off the pathway. So it's not a one-time thing. It's a continuous, and like you said, you need multiple. I think I'd take away to say you need multiple of them, right? So yeah, that's important. Praveen, I would ask you, say, for example, from a leadership and, like a male ally in executive leadership, uh, your role in playing sponsorship and advocating for women in leadership, what are some of the attributes, if you had to mentor somebody or be a sponsor for somebody, what would those attributes that you see that would make you kind, like the lovely said, there could be maybe multiple people who are seeking that. So as a leader, obviously everybody has business to take care of, and then you have that much time. So how do you identify, uh, first of all, what should the role of a leader and an ally from a leadership in a large organization be? What should be expected? And second, how do you then decide to be a sponsor to somebody?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the lovely made some great points there that there are a lot of male leaders in the organization, and then they don't realize the impact they have on the development of women for the future leaders. And that awareness is really important. that, okay, they are influencing how the organization talent is going to be developed, and then how the women have opportunities to grow within an organization, and how do they become sponsors and allies in that role. So first of all, like having that awareness that, okay, 50% of your talent is in women, and then you should not be ignoring them. But also like realizing that women are generally more humble, right? They're not going to go and sell themselves. But like as leaders, what we need to do is like take time to individualize the interaction with different employees, maybe more at a junior level, to get them into conversations, to figure out like what their aspirations are in life and what kind of future roles they're looking for, but also like plant some seeds around like what are the different options, right? What do you see being in a leadership role? You have gone through the journey where you have stumbled a little bit, you've had some success, but like you, when you started your career, you know only what you know, right? And now that the career is in the rear view, like there's more things you have learned, but then imparting that experience to them, saying that, okay, don't be like a frog in the well. There's a much bigger world out there, but then go explore, right? In the initial few years of your career, I always advise people that like try different things. And then once you try different things, then you'll know what you are passionate about and then what will make you happy. So if you follow your passion, obviously you will be successful in life and everything else will follow. So that's basically kind of the advice, or I think the male allies should play that role of like not just pointing to a solution, but like opening up with their experience and sharing what their journey has been, and like making themselves available so that like they are the junior folks can come in, especially women can come in and talk to them and be open about what they want to do and see what options are available to them.
And sometimes maybe not feel judged, because I think being judged is something that holds women back as well. Uh,
Yeah.
I think just my if I go back early in my days, and I would say, do I do this? How will I be looked at? Am I not supposed to be already knowing this? So I think sometimes it's ourselves also, right? That we kind of hold ourselves back a little bit. Um, Adam, how do you think organizations can formalize an allyship program? One, I know I've heard a lot of people say mentorship, and then you kind of select a mentor or you give a background. But is that tied in with a company's goal, that, or is it really tied with the intention of saying we do need to bring X number of women into a certain role? For example, Praveen's organization just doesn't deal with IT, right? It's a very it's different roles, like you said
Right.
earlier in the beginning, women in certain spaces. So how should those programs be looked at from an allyship perspective?
Right. And again, it comes back to what's the intention behind it from the first place, right? And then understanding that, it's kind of easier to move into that different type of allyship. And I think it's a tone from the top that has to be set. So however your company is set up, whether you're a Fortune 500 or a startup, the tone has to be set from the top. So absolutely, your leaders have to be on board and say, this is important to us. This is part of our company culture. This is who we are, and this is how we go to market, right? By understanding that, what a lot of people I don't think understand is that mentorship, allyship, building up your people, making sure that there is a healthy pipeline of talent behind you is a very important thing, right? And I know that is sometimes harder for our small businesses to understand than maybe our larger businesses, right? And I go back and when I have those conversations of what is the end game for this business, I was like, because I can't sell you, right? So if I'm mentoring DeLovely, she owns a business, I go, in 10 years, I can't sell DeLovely. I need to sell the business you've created because you're going to want to retire to the Caribbean. We can't do that, right? And so then to understand that you have to create this pipeline. So allyship, mentorship helps build that pipeline of future leaders for your organization behind you, right?
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you really have to understand that and understand what are you looking for in your future leaders? What are you trying to build up? What is the company culture? So then you have to go back and take a look at What is the culture of this company? Why do people want to come to work for X, Y, and Z company? Is it just because we give a great paycheck? Is it just because we have fantastic benefits? Or do we have a company culture of inclusion and allyship and partnership, whether formally stated or informally stated or both? Right? And I talk to a lot of junior leaders, and I'm like, even if there is not a formal mentorship program, one, you need to go find one. I think DeLovely brought this up, and this is why I love doing these panels, because I always walk away with a tidbit too, and I love diversity of mentors. I'm going to start using that now, so thank you. I hope you haven't trademarked it. But if there isn't one, find one. Right? Find a mentor, find the person, find the job that you want in 5 years and start making that person your mentor. Start talking to them. Then also realize that if you're leading people, you are a mentor, whether you want to be or not. You're a mentor of the people beneath you, because the role of a competent leader is to train up their replacement, which goes counterculture to some folks, right? But that's the mentality you have to have as a leader: is I need to train my replacement. I need to, so if something happens, there's somebody that can fill the shoes, whether permanently or on an ad hoc basis. There's another leader behind me. Then the other thing you have to realize too, maybe you're not a leader. Maybe you're one of just the people on a team. You still mentor by showing your own self at work. Right? We all bring things. Steel sharpens steel. So just our interaction with other people, we have to realize, is a mentorship opportunity. Right? And that's how I actually look for future leaders in my organization. Of like, who is kind of assuming a leadership position, a mentorship position, a coaching position, and they're really not a leader. They're one of the other workers, worker bees, if you will, on the team. But I can see them trying to help, trying to coach, trying to look out for somebody other than themselves. For me, that servant leadership attitude is really the important thing that we're looking for. And so again, it comes back to make something like this work. It's not just a boom, we've gone and had the 123 consulting company come in, and now we've put in this DE&I, this mentorship program. It is like, what is the company culture that is fueling this from behind it? Because once that it's kind of like a baby, right? Once you walk out of the hospital with the baby, it's now yours until, well, they never leave the house. I've come to find that out with my adult children. But you're responsible for this being now, right? And as soon as you put in a DE&I program, a mentorship program, and that consultancy leaves, you're now responsible for it. And how does it grow? How does it mature? How does it keep going on? So you really have to understand the culture that feeds and drives these programs.
No, that's true. And I think that also leads into unconscious bias hiring, right?
Yes.
Because if you're, like you said, if you're bringing in people, then you also need to have the unconscious bias. And I think when you said from top down, that truly comes in when you say there is some kind of, I won't say like a KPI. You can't have a KPI for something like that.
Right.
But it is a cultural thing, right? That you're building your organization to say, we need to have this just as a DNA, not like when you put numbers, I think to people, it becomes claustrophobic that, oh, now I just have to show, hey, I did so many activities for that. So I agree with you.
And
I would say,
I'm sorry, just on that point on numbers and DE&I and mentoring efforts, it does feel sometimes like it can be a little bit false when we start putting numbers on that. Yeah. But we also have to respect that in larger corporations, you have to have those numbers, right? You do have to have a benchmark. You have to have that so you can demonstrate to others the growth, because sometimes it's very hard to get people to understand in snapshots and how much communication time you have. So you have to be very careful between we don't want numbers because this really isn't a numbers game. This is how we just should be doing business. And I do need to be able to support the why behind why we're doing it. And sometimes that does involve numbers. So it is an Occam's razor that we walk in that respect. And so I just caution people not to fall to one side or the other too hard.
A difficult place to be for a company, though, if they have to do both, right? I mean, and rightly that you said there is a purpose that it needs to be done. So that'll lead me to asking Praveen, as an executive, how do you ensure, Praveen, that performance evaluations and potential leadership assessments are free of any kind of gender bias, right? And at your role, uh, maybe you have to be conscious and have that role as well in the company, right?
Yeah. So yeah, there's multiple things you need to do, or at least I do, is performance evaluations generally tend to be very subjective. And that's where some of the challenges come in, and you have some prejudices, and then you say, like, okay, this person is this way. But if you make it more objective, as you set goals for the year, you have your company strategy that kind of translates to your functional strategy, and then you create specific tasks and objectives and projects for your team, and then basically are assigned to various members of your team. And then you basically evaluate the performance based on that. It's not about the individual, but it's like, what did you expect the outcome to be? And it's both the what and the how. And if you are very specific about those things at the beginning when we do the goal setting, it becomes much easier towards the end. Otherwise, at the end, you're just kind of trying to scramble, and most of the time your memory is short. You just remember the last interaction with the person, and then you
Yes.
basically you do the evaluation based on that. The other things the good leaders should do is basically have an ongoing process. Like, so in my leadership, we do the 9 box cell, and it's looking at the potential and then the capability of a person, and then how they're
Awesome.
performing. So then map that out so that, like, year over year, you know, like how folks are moving in the 9 box cell, and then like what kind of opportunities you are giving them so that they can be successful. And so it's not like a point in time type of thing. The performance evaluation should be over a period of time or their career at your company. And then it is the leadership's job to provide the right kind of feedback in a timely manner, but also make sure that the right opportunities are presented so that they can be successful. So having a little bit of structure will go a long way, and ensure that, like, you're not being biased there, and you're making sure that you're being fair across the board.
That's
And
fantastic. Go
you
ahead.
make a good point. As we've talked about leaders here, I have a habit of telling people, whether they work for me or not, that you may not always have the leader that is so focused on your career growth, for a myriad of reasons. They're
Mhm.
stressed, they've got a boss like just giving them, the riot act every day, or,
Mhm.
they're not necessarily focused on your career, they're focused on their own. And what I do as a leader is when I meet my team, I'm always asking them, like, okay, where are you trying to go? What are you trying to do? And I'm checking in with them often.
Mhm.
So I give them tools to use so that when they're not necessarily reporting to me, because I am one of those leaders who I want to hear on a monthly basis how we're doing. How am I supporting you and coaching you? How am I removing roadblocks for you? But I want to hear about things that you want me to remember when it's time to do your evaluation. So I give them tools, because I'm like, you may not have someone who's going to ask these questions in your next role. So one of the things that I do for my own self that I learned is every month I have a folder of things that I put aside to remind myself of things to put in my evaluation, or to remind my leader of what I did. Because your point about we could have a colossal fail 3 weeks from calibration, and that's all people want to remember,
Mhm.
versus how you saved a school bus full of baby goats 6 months
Right.
ago. So making sure that you have tools and exercises that you use with your team that they can take wherever they go to
Mhm.
advocate for themselves. So it's almost like, people got to touch their resume every 3 months or 6 months. I tell people, put a little folder together of those kudos emails you get from other team members, or other team, or other leader, or a presentation you did where you nailed it, or a presentation
Mhm.
you did without your leadership present that you did really well, or you heard feedback from other people, so that you can jog your own memory, and then also jog the memory of your leader when it comes to actually doing your evaluation. And on the versus side, I've gone to leaders to say, you know what, you have complained about so and so to me 3 different times. Have you had that hard conversation with that person? Or are you
Mhm.
just sending them out to
Wow.
sea in a raft for them to figure it
Mhm.
out themselves? because there's a lot of people, often women, who male leaders are not comfortable speaking to, or maybe they're, an ethnic background that they're not comfortable speaking to, that unfortunately you're hurting their career by not giving them good feedback, not giving them critical feedback. And sometimes I can help with that. Like, hey, this is how you may position it. This is how you may want to address it. But keeping that critical feedback is just as harmful as keeping that positive feedback. And that's why I tell people, making sure that you have that well-rounded network of mentors who can tell you things that you may not want to hear. And sometimes that may not necessarily be what you're trying to convey, but that's how it's being perceived. And you need to understand that so you can make those adjustments. But giving people tools so they can advocate for their own development and their own calibration and performance evaluation is really super important, because unfortunately, not everybody is going to get great leaders like the ones on this panel.
No, that's great. So that brings me to Adam. Adam, can you share an experience that you might have helped a woman leader propel into a leadership position when she may have hesitated, right? Or must have felt that it's not meant for me, but there's an ambition, but there's a gap between the ambition and the execution of making an ask.
Yeah. I had a small business owner, a Black female business owner, and we worked for a year together. And when we first started meeting, it felt like talking to somebody who just owned a business, right? By the time we were done, and my feedback to her was like, now I feel like I'm actually talking to the CEO of a business, right? I am now having a business to business conversation, one business leader to another business leader, and we're able to have some very critical conversations. I think the thing that I have seen with a lot of female leadership is they want to be everything to everybody, and they want to be everywhere and make sure that they are kind of watching over everything, and especially when I'm working with female business owners and it is their business. Getting them to take a step back and stop. I told them, I was like, you need to run the business, not be in the business, and take a step back. And taking time for themselves, I think, is a critical component for any leader, right? To step back, have a time of reflection, to think about, where is your business? Who is running your business? Where is your business going? Who is your business interacting with? How will we get it to the next level? What is the next level? Right? And to have that time set aside where you can have those critical conversations with yourself, that internal dialogue. And a lot of people don't talk about internal dialogue enough, I think. But there has to be, for our competent leadership, internal dialogues where you're kind of walking through all of this stuff with yourself. And when she and I walked through several different exercises to get there, and I'd ask her very critical questions. She had one employee that was just not performing. Like, why do you still have this person here? Right? I mean, you've identified a weakness on the team, and well, it turned out to be a cousin. Right? And I'm like, well, I get it. I understand it. That's going to be a very kind of ugly, difficult conversation, but you need to probably move on from that person being in that role. You can move them to something else. You can help them find another job. You can do whatever you want to do, but you're going to have to get them out of that role. That took a long time for us to get to that point where she felt comfortable having that conversation. But once that happened, then all of a sudden it's like that logjam broke free, and she started seeing greater improvements. So helping folks talk through, I think, like DeLovely was saying, just talking through those difficult conversations, getting people to step aside, have the internal monologue, understand what's going on, take that time to sit down. And as mentors, we have to understand, where are we trying to drive our mentee to go? Right? We have to have those conversations up front. Again, it's my whole back to the intentional why. Why am I doing it? Why am I mentoring you? What is my intentionality behind mentoring you? What am I trying to accomplish by mentoring? And I think a lot of times mentors go into a mentor-mentee relationship thinking, well, I'm just kind of here as the guru on the hill, and they'll come to me with questions and I'll pass down knowledge, and that's how this ecosystem is going to work. If you as a mentor don't walk into a mentor-mentee relationship going, how am I going to better myself? How am I going to learn? How do I, as the mentor, improve from this relationship? Because it is a relationship. It is a back and forth. It is a give and take. And if you don't understand that, you're really not doing your protege or your mentee any justice, right? So being able to get her from a point of just owning a business to actually being and acting and speaking like a CEO of a small firm, I had to understand this is where I want to get her. I see the potential in this initial conversation. This is where she says she wants to get. Now I'm going to push to get her to this position and understand that's where we want to land. So that has been great. And we are still very, very tight friends. And to this day, she'll call me up every now and again and go, I've got a question. I've got a concern. What do you think about this? What have you heard about that? So again, also as mentors, we have to realize that we need to never shut down and think that, oh, did it. I ran through my formal mentor mentee protege program. I'm done. They're done. You need to have that. They need to be a part of your life, basically, forever.
That's true. No, that's true. And I
Yeah.
think oftentimes, this question does come up. In a recent example of ours that came up, I actually asked a client team that, how can we grow from X to X plus percentage, right? And they said, well, we were in Intelliswift at the time. And they said, well, you're a very small company. And
Right.
at the enterprise we are, maybe you don't have a seat at the table. And I turned around, well, that would become the end of the conversation, which I did not want. So I
Right.
just turned around and said, okay, in that case, how can we build a table together?
Yep.
Right? Can we build a table together? Help me get there, guide me as to what do we need to do. And maybe there's work to be done, of course, it's not tomorrow, but give me those nuggets that I need to work at
Yep.
versus walking away saying, okay, we don't have a seat at the table. Or Praveen, in your case, I would say, do you bring in a woman leader intentionally to say we need to give them a seat at the table to hear the voice? Maybe they would be earlier in the career, right? Not necessarily they always know it all. Every business is different. But from a corporation perspective, would you intentionally say, okay, my boardroom looks like all single kind of people? Would I bring a woman leader just to make sure we have another voice and another way of thought process? Would you do that in a company setting?
Yeah, like so that's kind of like I feel it's a wrong way to look because like you're trying to fill a seat because you're trying to meet some numbers and things like that, right? So we don't have goals like that, but like I truly believe that if you're trying to hire the right person for a job,
Yeah.
over time you'll have diversity at any level, at the leadership level. But like one thing we can definitely do as leaders is to at the grassroots levels clear up the path for young professionals
Absolutely.
so that they can not just constrain themselves to what their limitations are in their own head, but then open up the opportunities and encourage them to step outside the lines and try new things. And hopefully that'll encourage them to become more open, become better as leaders, and acquire the skills which they feel they would never would be able to acquire. And then over time, right, you will get the right people at the leadership level, and hopefully it'll be a good mix of like men and women. It's not just like so bringing in somebody for a particular reason, then obviously folks can clearly see through that, and then they will start to say, okay, you are doing it for the wrong reason. Right? So I generally stay away from that, but then make sure that we have the right opportunities for folks to get into the leadership level, make sure that like they don't underestimate their potential, make them aware of their potential, and then say like these make them aware of all the opportunities within the organization. And also like one of the things also you need to make sure folks are aware there's no straight line to getting to anywhere. Like lightning also takes the path of least resistance, so you may have to sometimes step aside and step sideways and do that, but also encourage people to learn various aspects of the business. Once they learn various aspects of the business, they become better leaders because now they can have a really good conversation with their peers and then be able to contribute positively in how the peer organization works and then what could be a better solution for them. So again, like not going after numbers, but like at the foundational levels, doing the right thing so that like we end up with what we are looking for.
Thank you so much for that, Praveen, that you do that because I hope many other leaders can emulate that too, right? It is important in our space, and it's also important to share because sometimes people don't share what's worked for them. So there are leaders with powers, but they don't reflect on what happened and how it can be changed. So when you share that in an open forum like ours today, thank you. I'm sure many will hear and many hopefully will adopt this too. And very appreciative that you give that path to the women or the younger professionals to come into that open pathway. Lovely, that brings me into asking you if there was a policy that you would feel could be put in place, or because you attend so many organizations and events and on similar topics, is there something that caught your attention, a policy that a company or a individual put in place to make this impact?
I think, at the hiring stages, policies to have that diversity slate for people to consider different candidates, I think is important.
Mhm.
I think it puts the onus on the company to say, hey, we're not going to necessarily just look at the obvious people
Mhm.
for these roles, and really search far and wide. And that really puts more action behind some of the policies and the outcomes that we're trying to drive. What that does often is that may make the recruitment process take a little bit longer.
Yeah.
We know that women often won't apply for roles where they don't feel like they have every single, requirement. And encouraging people who may not necessarily think that this company would hire them to apply.
Yes.
And also, it exposes those hiring managers to different people that they will have conversations about certain abilities. Because sometimes you're going to have conversations with candidates and you're going to get ideas and things to consider that you did not even consider for this role or for the team.
Mhm.
And having that diversity in the slate, I think, is really important, to the point of just hiring someone that looks different just because, again, do you have an outcome? Is that clear before we just make the hire?
Yeah.
And I've actually hired different because I have an outcome. Like, I know we have to start communicating with different people in this group. And I've got a one group of people that are very homogenous. So how are we going to make sure that the message is received by everyone? So I need to make sure there's more diversity in this group that's
Brilliant.
producing an
Yes.
outcome, right? But
Mhm.
that's because I knew the outcome that I was trying to get.
Fine.
Right.
But I think those policies are important to keep to make sure that hiring managers have that exposure. We hire people we like. We hire
Mhm.
people that have commonalities to us.
Mhm.
Those are physiological things. They have nothing to do with discrimination, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's a whole layer of that. Yes. And we're not going to dismiss that in this conversation. But we think about the things that we like to do, we think about the places we like to go, and we instantly have a connection with people who share those.
Mhm.
When you have that diversity, that slate, you can actually start to have conversations and talk to people and be like, oh, well, we never even thought about that. I have been that hire that they're like, you know what, we're going to create this role for you because we weren't even thinking about any of these
Mhm.
things. We
Mhm.
weren't even considering these situations that you're bringing up. So
Mhm.
you can actually have an opportunity to think differently, have new ideas, consider things for the team, consider outcomes that you want to now actually have and think about when you have that diversity in your slate. I think that's important. I just think that initial exposure for hiring managers is very important, because I've seen a lot of hiring managers say, like, you know what, I never thought about it that way until I talked to a different group of people on this panel that necessarily wouldn't have been what I thought would have been great for this role.
Sure. And that brings me to our male allies here. Adam, would you hesitate in being an ally to somebody outright and open, right? Would you
No,
hesitate?
no, not at all. Not at all. And I tell you, that's again because of having seen what diversity does, what diversity in action does and can accomplish, and how it is truly I mean, let's put it down to business terms. It's an X factor, right? What people don't realize is a diverse team is a far higher functioning team than a homogenous team. It really is. The outcomes are different. The outcomes are more quality. Usually your speed to market or your speed to solution is faster because you have that diversity of not just physiological differences, but you have the diversity of education, you have the diversity of background, you have the diversity of experience,
Yep.
right? And it is a very real fact that a homogenous group, the experiences, backgrounds, and paths to that position are fairly similar. Different, yes, but fairly similar. By having a diverse group, those paths to that particular position or situation are radically different. Right, wrong, or indifferent. That is just the truth of how we get to be where we are. And that diversity can't be replicated any other way than having intentional leadership do so. Let me tell you this, to have an intentionally diverse group takes a very strong leader who is not afraid to challenge the status quo. And
I
that's what
100%.
you have to look at, right? I'll quote one of my favorite Michael Jackson songs. You have to start with the man or the woman in the mirror. Honestly, one of the most real phrases out there. You have to look in the mirror and say, if the world's going to change, it's going to start right here.
Thank you so much. That is so powerful. And before we conclude today's very, very insightful and powerful session, is there a book or a read or
Hmm.
a source that you would point out to any of us that you feel is very important and one must read? As a leader, you look at something, a podcast, a book, or anything like that. And Praveen, I'll start with you.
Yeah, like I can think of a book very quickly, but I can talk about some of the mentors I've had in the past, and then as individuals who are going through our careers, and especially in the early stages of life, look not just within your organization, like look outside of your organization and individuals who basically inspire you, who basically do things differently, and have a conversation. And then that's where like I would recommend like a lot of the young professionals to go, especially women, talk to other people, because don't feel shy about that. It's like, and then don't just focus on your area of expertise or your function. Going broader always brings a different perspective, and then it'll teach you things you never thought about. So like, yeah, there's a lot of knowledge in books, there's a lot of knowledge in podcasts, but that the human interaction piece is what will make you more successful. And then when people connect, then they are willing to share a lot more than what they would put in writing or in podcasts and things like that. And the personal experiences of people who have gone through tough times and who have been in situations you are in, that those kind of will really open up some doors or help you find some solutions which you may not be thinking about.
Anything from you, Lovely, that you would like in closing remarks?
Yes, I think the mentorship and the well-rounded mentorship is really important. A book that I find, something that I go back to, is When Others Say You Won't by Daphne Jones, and she gives a really compelling argument and a system to get the tools in your toolkit that you need for your career growth. Mentorship and coaching and sponsorship is a big part of it. But she kind of talks about how to do that, like seeking out the people that you see as where you want to go, and looking at their career path and people along that path, looking at opportunities that you need to sharpen skills that you need. As someone who's in the hunt now, and I'm in transition for my next role, looking at the pieces and parts in my career that I actually want to sharpen while I have the time, the certificates and the learning and the people that I'm talking to. There's a lot of insight in that book that you'll carry with you for your entire career. especially when it gets a little bit challenging in the landscape that we have today. But those networks and those relationships, keeping them warm and making sure you're checking in with people, because it may not necessarily be about an opportunity. It may be a problem that you're trying to solve or something that you're trying to learn, but also just being able to connect to someone on a personal basis. That goes a long way for building that sponsorship that you need in turn, because it's not about just what you've been able to accomplish. Are you someone that can connect well with the executive leaders at a particular company? Because it's a very intimate relationship when you start talking about thousands of people's, well-being, products that serve customers, a P&L of millions, the legal ramifications of risk, of security. It's a very intimate relationship that you need to be able to see someone eye to eye and make sure that they trust you.
Yeah.
So being able to build those relationships with people who can knock on doors and open windows is really, really important. And you really can't afford to stop in your career until you're really ready to retire. But even then, when you're ready to retire, who's going to tell you about all the great vacation spots you need to go to? So
Exactly.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's clear that in achieving, equity in leadership and being in that room with leaders who help you rise, it requires both. It requires strong policies, like you said, measurements are required. That is a pathway to at least knowing that there's progress along the way, as well as committed allyship. And I think leaders like Adam, Praveen, that you all shared your pathways that you've opened up, your philosophies that you implement in your organizations is definitely very clear and encouraging. So I'd really think let's continue the momentum and work towards that real actionable change that we're going to bring, because it doesn't happen overnight. And I want to thank you for joining us today. It really, I think we're going to take away a lot of nuggets from this as we kind of consolidate, hey, what all did we hear from everyone today, from what you do to execute and what we must do to continue further. So thank you so much for making time. And this is for a good close. Anything else that you want to say? Otherwise, we will call it end for today, but we'll definitely continue these conversations again.
Yeah, I just, I wanted to bring up the book that I would recommend to folks. And it's not your typical business book. You're not going to go find it in the business section. You actually have to go to the sci-fi section to find this book. And the book is called Starship Troopers. Please don't go watch the movie when I mention this. Do not go watch the movie. Read the book. Open up a book and read it, everybody. It is by Robert Heinlein, and it is probably the best book on leadership that you can ever read. That's not a leadership book. It is a story of a young man growing into leadership.
Okay.
And it is actually, it was recommended to me by a lieutenant colonel in the Marines as a young leader to read this book to understand what is servant leadership, what is leading from the front, what is setting expectations, but being able to perform those expectations yourself. It's an amazing book on leadership. You're going to think it's actually about a battle of saving Earth. It is actually a book on leadership. So again, if you want to read a great book on leadership that's not a book on leadership, Robert Heinlein, Starship Troopers.
Thank you so much. With that, we'll call it a close, and high fives.
Wow.
Yay, lovely. Thank you so much.